Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
What is up, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host today, Grady Duggan, and we have a great show for you on hand. We're about a month and a half from the NFL kicking off their training camps, so I'm going to be taking you through the ins and outs of the fantasy drafts that you have coming up. I'm going to help you make those tough decisions that'll help you get to the top of your league. If you stick around to the end, we're going to be talking about the top 5 players in every single division. All right, let's get to it. First up, we're going to be diving into the top 15 sleepers in the 2020 NFL season. The reason getting these depth pieces onto your roster is so crucial to succeed in fantasy football is because you can get the big names in the first couple rounds like Saquon Barkley, Lamar Jackson that'll help your team, but it's these back end of the roster guys who are really going to help your team consistently stay at the top of your league and get you to that championship that everyone shoots for. So, with that being said, number 15 on my list, kind of the flyer of the group, not going to lie, I'm going to go with Rashad Penny, Seattle Seahawks running back. This one can be seen as a little bit of a risky pick because in his sophomore campaign, he fell behind Chris Carson, who was the top running back for the Seahawks. But right before Rashad Penny tore his ACL, he was just starting to pick up some steam. In 2 games, he had over 150 yards with 3 touchdowns, and it really seemed like he was starting to kind of get comfortable with the NFL's speed. So this one can be beneficial because due to his injury, he's not going to get drafted too high, and this is a potential guy who you can pick up in the last round or two, just stash him on your bench until he gets healthy, and you have a chance to have a real contributor on one of the top teams in the NFL. I mean, with Russell Wilson as your quarterback, that offense is going to be functioning consistently the whole season. So there's not too much risk with taking a flyer on Rashad Penny and has the potential to really pay out in those later rounds. Next up on the list, probably the least notable name that I'm going to be talking about today is New York Giants receiver Darius Slayton. Slayton is a second-year wideout out of Auburn and really, I think, has the potential to burst in onto the fantasy football scene this year. He's obviously behind Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate on their receiving core, but that just means he's not going to be getting the top 2 corners on every single team. He's going to be seeing a lot of nickel action, maybe some safeties. And at the end of the year last year, he really came into his own. Giants faced some injuries, and Slayton was asked to take a little bit of a bigger role. In the last 6 games, he had 2 different games with over 100 receiving yards and racked up 5 touchdowns in that time. So Darius Slayton has an opportunity to really boost his name and be a big help for the New York Giants next season, especially with big names like Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram in their receiving core. that they're going to be getting all the attention. So Slayton has a chance to really be one of the big red zone threats that people haven't really heard of. McVay is one of the top play callers in the NFL, and he loves to get the ball into his tight end's hand. Last year, Higbee had 730 yards and 3 touchdowns, and honestly, I would expect both of those numbers to be up this year. The Rams play in one of, if not the toughest division in football, so they're not going to see too many games where the whole fourth quarter is running out the clock and they're not doing much. They're going to be in competitive games and need a consistent tight end that they can get the ball to, and I think Tyler Higbee really has the chance to be one of the top 15 scoring tight ends this year in fantasy football, so I'd look out for him. Especially since over the years, the NFL has slowly evolved into much more of a passing league, and offensive coordinators have been asked to get a lot more creative recently in their game plans, and rather than just getting the balls to these playmaking wide receivers, people are really starting to look for their tight ends to make plays and help their team get on the board. So again, Tyler Higbee, my number 13 on my top 15 sleeper list. And next up, a speedster out of University of Southern California, someone who people had high hopes for last year, but the offense had a lot of questions around him and just couldn't put 2 and 2 together. So now up is Ronald Jones, running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And obviously, with the acquisitions of Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski, that offense got a lot more dynamic and a lot more dependable. And I think Ronald Jones could really come into his own. Bruce Arians is going to have a high-flying, high-octane offense. And it might be tough to predict how Gronkowski will play after taking some time off. But even without him, the Bucs with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, they have one of the more talented receiving corps in the league. And so when you have those guys running routes for you, defenses aren't going to be able to stack the box and get too many people up front. And that has the opportunity to really open up the field for Ronald Jones. He only had one 100-yard game in 2019, but I would expect that to be a lot higher next year. He has the speed and the ability to really break through anytime he gets the ball. And he also, which is big in fantasy football, he has the ability to be a big-time threat in the passing game. So if you play in a points per reception league, Ronald Jones could really be a dual-threat running back. He has the opportunity to put up some big numbers this year in that offense. So watch out. That's a good one. But let's keep it moving. Number 11 on my top 15 sleeper picks for the 2020 fantasy football season. Someone who had a really great rookie season I really liked is Hunter Renfrow, Las Vegas Raiders receiver. He's not someone who's going to blow you away with his frame or blow you away with his speed, but he's someone that is just going to be one of the most reliable receivers on your team. He already has a good working relationship with quarterback Derek Carr, and I think he has a chance to take a big leap in his second season in the NFL. I realize that the Las Vegas Raiders already have Tyrell Williams penciled in as their number one option, as well as going pretty receiver heavy in the 2020 NFL draft, taking Henry Ruggs out of Alabama, one of the top receivers in the draft, with their first pick, and Brian Edwards in the third round out of South Carolina. However, I do not see any of these players eating into Renfrow's targets. If anything, having Tyrell Williams and Henry Ruggs on the field with Renfrow at the same time, it's going to benefit Renfrow. Gruden and Derek Carr love to get Hunter Renfrow the ball, and he is a shifty receiver in the slot that is just going to be consistent for that offense. So, if anything, I could really see him being one of the top scorers in the Raiders offense. That is a name to watch and someone who could be worth taking a flyer on in one of the later rounds. Coming up next on the list is another tight end I am high on, TJ Hawkinson. TJ Hawkinson of the Detroit Lions is someone who I think really has this potential to be a top 10 tight end in this league. He came out of the gates hot in his rookie season in 2019 and then slowed up a bit before dealing with some injuries. But I know the Detroit Lions are very high on this player, and with a healthy Matthew Stafford, he really has the chance to develop into one of the better pass-catching tight ends. I think the Lions have one of the more balanced offenses, which is something I'm going to get into later, and that's going to really benefit him. With Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, Bo Scarborough, DeAndre Swift, Kerryon Johnson, just to name a few, they have an offense that is really going to scare some people down the road, and TJ Hawkinson has the opportunity to really flourish under Darren Bevell. Matthew Stafford loves to find his tight ends in the red zone, and so I could see TJ Hawkinson being someone who scores a lot of points for your fantasy football team next year. In comparison, I could see him having a very similar season to Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens last season. He absolutely went off, scoring 13 touchdowns. So I honestly could really see TJ Hawkinson in that range in that offense. So expect big things. Coming up next on my list of sleepers as we break into the top 10 is number 9, Anthony Miller, wide receiver of the Chicago Bears. This is someone who I've been extremely high on ever since he came out of University of Memphis in 2018. This is someone who hasn't yet burst onto the scene in the NFL, mainly because Mitchell Trubisky has really struggled since getting into the league. But now with Nick Foles at quarterback, I think Matt Nagy and the Chicago Bears really are going to step it up a bit, and Anthony Miller is someone who not only is a deep threat, but finds a way to get open in the middle of the field, and he has the chance to really be a solid number 2 behind Allen Robinson. This is a receiver who has shown bits of potential, especially during his 2018 rookie season, but Anthony Miller has yet to be consistent with it. And now going into 2020 with a new quarterback in Matt Nagy's offense, he has the potential to really pencil himself in as one of the better second wide receivers in the league. And similar to what I said about Tyler Higbee of the Rams earlier in this podcast, Anthony Miller with the Bears plays in a deep division that they often are going into competitive four-quarter games. There's not going to be too many running clocks in the fourth quarter, and that's going to benefit Anthony Miller's production on the fantasy football side. The passing game for the Bears is going to need to step up, and it's going to need some playmakers, and Anthony Miller has the potential to break out for the Chicago Bears. And now, not going far from the Bears, staying within the NFC North, coming in at number 8 on my top 15 sleepers is Allen Lazard, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. The Packers offense can be a tricky one to predict. They shocked the whole league in the 2020 NFL draft by picking up Utah State quarterback Josh Love in the first round rather than getting Aaron Rodgers some offensive weapons that he so desperately needs. But to me, not picking up a first-round offensive player like people thought they were going to be is a sign that Matt LaFleur, head coach, has some options in-house already on the roster that he really believes in. And I think Allen Lazard is at the top of that list. The Packers are going to be without Jimmy Graham this season. Their starting tight end is Jace Sternberger. And their running game has been a little suspect the past couple years, so they are going to need a reliable number 2 option in that offense behind Devontae Adams, and I think Allen Lazard is that guy. Aaron Rodgers loves to spread the ball around to different options, and someone's going to need to pick it up. Lazard is a big 6'5" frame, and he's a target over the middle and into the red zone that Aaron Rodgers is going to feed the ball to. Between Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, no one in the Packers running back stable has really proved that they can carry the load. As much as Matt LaFleur wants to be a run-first offense, I really see this being another season where Aaron Rodgers and his receiving core is going to have to carry the load. So expect Allen Lazard to have a big year. And now, up next, number 7 on my top 15 sleeper list, the third player from the NFC West and the first San Francisco 49er, former undrafted free agent Raheem Mostert. And honestly, he's been what is known as a special team ace throughout his career, and in 2019, he showed what he could do given the right opportunity. Ending the season as probably the second biggest threat behind George Kittle in that offense, I would expect him to pick up that momentum going into the 2020 season. He was Kyle Shanahan's most reliable running back as the 49ers made a push for the Super Bowl, and really was the reason they got there following a 220-yard performance against the Packers in the NFC Championship. With Matt Breida out, I would expect Raheem Mostert to take over the bulk of carries and really be the number one guy in San Francisco. They didn't really put any significant offseason pickups in the backfield, and I think Raheem Mostert has the potential to be a number one guy in one of the best offenses in the NFL. Kyle Shanahan has really gained the reputation as probably the best offensive coordinator in the NFL. And to be the number one guy in his offense is someone you want on your fantasy football team. Raheem Mostert is probably someone who's going to go a little higher than most of the people we've talked about in this segment. But giving some value out of the passing game on top of being the bulk carrier in that offense, I'm expecting Raheem Mostert to be an extremely productive fantasy football player next year. And now, coming up next, number 6 on the list, yet another running back, Justin Jackson of the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers have showed their willingness to have a two-man backfield, and I honestly would expect Austin Eckler to get a little bit more carries than Justin Jackson, but neither of them strike me as someone who can be a 3-down back in the NFL, and Justin Jackson will most likely get a lot of their 3rd down carries as well as be a threat in the passing game. With Justin Herbert, rookie out of Oregon, as their quarterback, I think they're going to need to lean heavily on their offensive weapons, especially their running game. So I'm thinking Justin Jackson is probably someone you can pick up in the later rounds, like probably after round 10, and get some value out of him. And as we finally break into the top 5, I'm going to give you a name I love. I think he is going to be a top tight end on one of the better offenses in the league, Blake Jarwin of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, this is a guy who has consistently improved during his time in Dallas, and now, for the first time, really gets to be alone at the top of the tight end depth chart for the first time in his career. And while this is a run-heavy offense with Ezekiel Elliott, and they do have a lot of firepower at their receiving core, I'm expecting new head coach Mike McCarthy to still heavily involve his tight end in his game plans, especially in the red zone. Blake Jarwin wasn't among the top 20 scoring tight ends this year, but I'm predicting that Jarwin is going to make a jump into that range easily this coming NFL season. Now, going more into the top 5 at number 4 is another tight end, someone you might not have heard of too often. a name that's fairly hard to pronounce, Mike Gesicki, tight end for the Miami Dolphins. After having a quiet rookie season in 2018, 2019, Gesicki showed his potential to break out. Brian Flores has really been building a nice roster, and I could see them being a team making a big jump this year. I don't really think they're going to be a playoff team, but with a talented quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama, I think they're going to have a little bit more of a stable offense and expect that tight end position to be heavily involved. And now, as we head over to the AFC North for the first time, number 3 on my top 15 sleeper list is James Washington, wide receiver of the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers have a front office that has been notoriously good at finding mid to late round wide receivers and turning them into long-time NFL contributors. And I think that is exactly what is going to come about this coming season with James Washington. It's hard to talk about the Steelers and put any value on their offensive players last year with Devin Hodges and Mason Rudolph as their quarterbacks. But despite all that, James Washington still averaged just above 16 yards per catch last year. And I'm going to predict that he's going to be around that again this year. James Washington had 5 different games in 2019 where he had over 10 points in PPR leagues. Now, with a healthy Big Ben and James Conner coming into the 2020 season, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to get right back to where they usually are in that division. With Juju Smith-Schuster being their number 1 guy, I think James Washington is going to fill that void that they've been missing since Antonio Brown and really be the deep threat that they drafted him out of Oklahoma State to be. And now, James Washington is nice, but it gets better. Going over to the AFC East, out of Buffalo, we have Devin Singletary as number 2 on my top 15 sleeper list of this fantasy football season. On a young Buffalo team that has only been improving under Doug McDermott, I think Devin Singletary is going to have another breakout season. This is someone who rushed for 775 yards during his rookie year, and that was behind Frank Gore. With Frank Gore going over to the New York Jets, I think Devin Singletary is going to be alone in that running back crew for the most part, and I'm expecting big things. They did draft Zach Moss out of Utah, who also has the chance to be great, and I will get into that later, but I think they're going to rely heavily on Devin Singletary, not only in the run game, but he poses a threat in the passing game, which is a big value in fantasy football, as you know. So I am expecting a big leap into his sophomore year for Devin Singletary. And now, finally, for the number 1 spot, a Dallas Cowboy, Michael Gallup. Another receiver who had a honestly breakout sophomore campaign and really established himself as the number 2 guy behind Amari Cooper. And this is an offense that lost Randall Cobb and Jason Witten, so is going to need some people to step it up. He averaged 8 targets per game in 2019, and after racking up over 1,000 yards and hauling in 6 touchdowns, I think this receiver, Michael Gallup, is going to continue his tear. Some might wonder why this would be considered a sleeper, but in that offense with Amari Cooper, Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, and now CD Lamb, I think Gallup is going to get a little buried in the hype, and people are going to forget about him, and he is someone you can probably pick up in the 8 to 10 round range in your fantasy football draft, and he is going to give you high value. So that is my top 15 sleeper list. I appreciate you guys listening to segment 1. Coming up next after the break in segment 2 is what rookies to draft and what rookies to stay away from. So let's get to it in a bit. Thank you.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, welcome back, everybody. If you enjoyed my top 15 sleeper list, just wait to see what I have in store for you. Later in the show, I'm going to be going over my top 5 fantasy football performers in every division. But first, let's shed some light on the new guys. Rookies. I am going to be going over my top 5 rookies to draft, as well as my 5 rookies to avoid for your fantasy football team. First up, number 1 guy to draft is an Arizona State product, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver, the San Francisco 49ers first round pick. He went a little higher than most people expected, but going in to Kyle Shanahan's system, this guy has a chance to really produce at the NFL level right away. Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated just rated Brandon Ayuk number 4 on his rookie rankings. This is a player who started his college career at Sierra College, a JC in Northern California, and then transferred and finished up his last 2 years at ASU. He was just shy of 500 yards in his junior year, but then came onto the scene and went off his senior year with 1,192 yards and 8 touchdowns. This is a guy who makes things happen after the catch. He is a yards after the catch monster like I have never seen before. He has the ability to stretch the field vertically, which is big in Kyle Shanahan's offense. This guy ran a 4.5 at the NFL Combine. And one of the only cons about him is he can get stuck at the line, especially with press coverage. But Kyle Shanahan is known for being creative with his play calling and really being able to get receivers open space in the field. So that's something that keep an eye out for, but I wouldn't be too worried because they're going to ask him to start immediately alongside Deebo Samuel. And you saw last year how well Deebo Samuel did once the Niners traded for Emmanuel Sanders and really got another guy. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen here. These two could potentially be dangerous for opposing teams. Honestly, next up, it was one of my favorite players in the draft this year. Running back DeAndre Swift out of Georgia was taken by the Detroit Lions in the 2nd round. And this guy is just fun to watch on the football field, guys. He has incredible speed and some vision that not a lot of people possess, and he can just go in and out of defenses, and I think he has a chance to take over Kerryon Johnson's starting role, and that offense needs a consistent running back, and DeAndre Swift could be that guy. With a healthy Matt Stafford, that team was one of the best passing offenses in the league, and they have a healthy fullback in Nick Bodden coming back. I think DeAndre Swift could be a guy that honestly you're probably going to be able to get a little later in the draft because people think Carryon's going to be there. But he has the chance to really make some noise this year. He rushed for over 1,000 yards twice in the SEC. So that just tells you the type of runner that the Lions are getting in DeAndre Swift. And although he is a speedster, he honestly has a pretty big frame for a running back at 5'9", 215 pounds. He's known for being a bit of a power back when he needs to be. So this is someone who's going to be able to go up and stack up well against NFL defenses. So I would not expect a drop-off in productivity from him. Another trait Swift possesses that I brought up earlier in the show is big for running backs. He's a great pass-catching back, which the Lions love to go towards with Matthew Stafford. They are kind of an aerial attack, so there's a lot of different ways Swift is going to be able to provide some big production this year with the Lions. But let's keep it moving. I've given you two gems to watch out for in Brandon Ayuk and DeAndre Swift. And this next guy I might even be more excited about, and that is Indianapolis Colts running back out of Wisconsin, Jonathan Taylor. He was the Colts' second-round pick, and honestly, I think he could really produce with that team. They have greatly improved. They have Phillip Rivers at quarterback now, and honestly, arguably one of the best offensive lines. And they were kind of just missing a do-it-all back, and now they have that in Jonathan Taylor. This is a running back who not once but twice was a 2,000-yard rusher at Wisconsin in 2018 and 2019. Not to mention in 2017, he was at 1,900 yards, so almost a three-time rusher. He was a Heisman hopeful at Wisconsin, didn't quite get there, but he has the opportunity to produce more than any other rookie, in my opinion. And he is also not the only Indianapolis Colt I have on this list. Next up, someone who was picked just 7 picks before Jonathan Taylor is his new teammate, Michael Pittman Jr., wide receiver out of University of Southern California. This is a big-bodied receiver at 6'4", 220 pounds. Gives you the ability to go up and get those contested throws, which can be helpful when you have kind of a crazy quarterback like Phillip Rivers throwing you the ball. Michael Pittman Jr. is a extremely physical receiver, which I love at that position. He can get after it, even in the blocking game too, when they're running the ball. He's tough to bring down once he gets the ball in his hands. He's not a very elusive player, in my opinion. He's not going to juke you out too much or get some spins, but he can run through you and he can move. He could be a nice big slot receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, who really have the potential to, I think, win that division with all these weapons that they've been adding this season. Michael Pittman Jr. was a second-team All-American in 2019 and a 2-time All-Pac-12 player at USC. And I expect that production to carry over to the NFL. Pittman is a receiver who, he's got good speed, but he's not going to blow the top off of the defense. If you watch his highlight films at University of Southern California, you see a lot of streaks going down the sidelines, but they honestly, a lot of them are contended catches, and he gets up there and gets most of them. With that 6'4" frame, he's able to get above the DBs, which it's going to be a little bit more challenging in the NFL, but there's nothing that has shown me that would make me think that he's not going to be able to continue that success. This next guy who is going to be rounding out my top 5 rookies to draft is probably the least known guy on this list. Kind of a dark horse, Buffalo Bills running back out of Utah, Zach Moss. I talked about his counterpart, Devin Singletary, earlier in the show, and I think Zach Moss has the chance to do exactly what Singletary did last season, be a nice 2-second back, a little compliment to Frank Gore, and now I think Moss can be that to Singletary. Zach Moss was honestly one of the best running backs in Utah history. Moss rushed for over 1,000 yards in his last 3 seasons at the University of Utah, and even got that team to be a top 5 team at one point for the first time in a long time. This is someone who brings a lot of different aspects to this Buffalo Bills offense. When healthy, he honestly was one of the better running backs in college football last year. He has good size at 5'9", 222 pounds. And he's someone who honestly is probably referred to as a power back. He can lower that shoulder and go right through defenders, which honestly is something that is going to complement Devin Singletary extremely nicely in that Bills offense, because he's a little bit more of a scat back from going side to side. One thing you consistently see on Zach Moss's college tape is the ability and vision he has to cut back on runs and really take those. One thing to note, Zach Moss, though, did have a knee issue in 2018 at Utah. He tore his meniscus. So there is some health concerns there, but when healthy, this guy is a impressive back, and I think that has a chance to really go over into the NFL as well. So there you have it, folks. My top 5 rookies to draft: Brandon Ayuk, DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman Jr., and Zach Moss. Do not forget those names as you gear up for your fantasy football draft this year. And as much as I'm a positive guy, I like to look on the bright side, especially with fantasy football. You got to be real sometimes. So these next 5 guys I'm going to be talking about are people, in my opinion, to avoid. I am not as high as some experts are on these people. I'm going to come out of the gate strong here. This is one that people are not going to like to hear, but my number 1 rookie to stay away from is the reigning Heisman Trophy winner and national champion Joe Burrow from LSU. Number 1 overall pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. And it's not that I'm necessarily low on him as a player. I think he has the traits to be a great franchise quarterback. But you got to pay attention to the team he is drafted to. They have a good offensive coach in Zach Taylor, who I think could really help his development. But this roster is not good, especially for a rookie quarterback playing in a tough division. You got the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Browns, who I think could be very good this year. That is 3 teams that could be fighting for playoff spots. Just not a rookie-friendly schedule. So I would shy away from Joe Burrow. A couple years down the road, I could see Joe Burrow being an extremely productive NFL quarterback, but just not this year. Sometimes it takes a couple years for quarterbacks to really get going and find their groove in the NFL. And honestly, you've seen it before where a lot of quarterbacks benefit from a first year on the bench, just learning everything and really getting to be able to grasp that NFL speed. I think Joe Burrow has the tools to be great, but just not yet. That is one player I would shy away from, as I said earlier. Do not draft him, guys. Next up on the list is Joe Burrow's new teammate, 2nd round pick out of Clemson, wide receiver T. Higgins for the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, this is another case of not that I don't think he could be good, but I just do not trust the Bengals offense to put up points this year. Also, T. Higgins didn't even run a full route tree in the spread offense that Clemson runs. So I am imagining that it's going to be a little bit of a challenge coming over into the NFL. I think T. Higgins could be a bit of a project. Let him sit behind A.J. Green and the veteran receivers that they have over there in Cincinnati and learn. But with a roster like they do, he might get thrust into playing some, and I do not think it will translate over into the fantasy football stat sheet. This is a receiver who is a big body and saw a lot of success in the red zone. So that is something to take into consideration with a grain of salt. But It's just not worth it to me taking a draft pick on this guy. And to be honest, I don't see him getting picked up in too many leagues. So my first two rookies to avoid in your fantasy draft, both Cincinnati Bengals, T. Higgins and Joe Burrow. Next up, we're going to stay in that same division, but hop on over to the Pittsburgh Steelers with Chase Claypool, tight end out of Notre Dame. And one of the main reasons I'm not too high on this pick is you just heard me say tight end because he was a productive tight end for Brian Kelly and the Fighting Irish in college. But the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted him as a wide receiver. And that was fairly common around scouting circles in the NFL going into this draft. He has the athleticism and the speed where people think he could play wide receiver at the next level, which is interesting. You usually kind of see the opposite going from wide receiver to tight end if someone's too big. But Chase Claypool does have the tools and I think could be productive somewhere down the road. But I think it's going to be kind of a project to get him ready and switch positions, similar to Jalen Hurd, the 49ers third-round draft pick last year, where he kind of had a redshirt season. That could happen with Chase Claypool. I'm not too sure if they're going to be putting him right out into the fire, but if he is, that is one player I would kind of avoid. I don't see him being too productive in his rookie season. There is some hype surrounding him, but I would cool it on that because I do not think it will carry over to the fantasy football stat sheet. One trait that Claypool does possess is he is 6'4", so it's a big body and a great target once you get down into the red zone. And he would have some opportunities to score, but with Big Ben coming back, you have Vance McDonald, James Conner, Juju Smith-Schuster, and even James Washington, who I talked about earlier in this episode. So I just don't envision Chase Claypool being one of the main guys that Big Ben's going to be looking for in the red zone. He wants a more reliable person who he has a working relationship with and he knows he can trust. So I don't know if Mike Tomlin is going to be putting Chase Claypool out there when he has 3 to 4 guys who have already built a rapport with Ben Roethlisberger. But now, carrying on with my top 5 rookies to avoid in the 2020 fantasy football drafts, we're going to be leaving the AFC North, going over to Philadelphia where they picked up Jalen Reagor out of TCU with their first round pick. And honestly, I have a lot of questions for this pick. Reagor does hold elite speed. He can really stretch the defense vertically, but he has a knack for dropping the ball, which honestly has been a big issue for the Eagles the past couple years. And another thing that made me scratch my head at this pick is he had one good year in 2018 where he was over 1,000 yards, but beyond that, honestly didn't produce that much in college. So the Jalen Reagor pick looks a little bit like a project pick to me, and that is something I would look to avoid for his rookie season if I was a fantasy football owner. And now getting to my last player, who is the top rookie I would look to avoid in the upcoming fantasy football drafts. This is one I might take some heat for. People might not like this choice, but I'm going to go with the Dallas Cowboys first round pick, CeeDee Lamb out of the University of Oklahoma. Look, I'm not denying this guy has talent. He has speed that he can stretch the field anytime, but I just do not see it going over into the NFL as much as it did in college. He's got speed, but so do these DBs in the NFL. And one of the things that always makes me question it is he was playing Big 12 defenses, so he wasn't going up against the best competition. And he goes into the NFL in a tough division. I just kind of makes me a little eerie and scared to pick up CeeDee Lamb. Also, he's got a lot of offensive weapons around him in Amari Cooper, Ezekiel Elliott, We talked about Michael Gallup earlier in this podcast as a breakout potential. So I just don't see CeeDee Lamb having as big of a year as certain experts think he will. So there you have it, my top 5 rookies to pick and my top 5 rookies to avoid. Let's run through the top 5 rookies to avoid one last time. That's Joe Burrow, CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, Chase Claypool, and Jalen Reagor. So there you have it. Coming up after the break, we're going to dive into what offenses are going to be able to provide you with some firepower this year and what offenses are not going to be putting up too many fantasy points for you. So stick around after the break. Let's get into it.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. We just had an exciting time talking about the best rookies coming into the 2020 season as well as the rookies to avoid in your fantasy football draft. And now we're going to be getting to it, chatting about what offenses as a whole should you be looking for, what offenses are going to have multiple people producing for fantasy football. And also a couple offenses that I would try to stay away from at least until they prove themselves after a couple games showing that they're going to be putting up some numbers. So let's get to it. First offense that I am high on this season is the Buffalo Bills. Offensive coordinator Brian DeBall, I think, really has a chance to accelerate this offense into a top 10 offense this coming season. Josh Allen has been taking some impressive strides every single season and could really break through. One thing I do like about Josh Allen also as a fantasy quarterback is he gives you a little threat with his legs as well. He can scramble around. Not only does he have one of the biggest arms in the league and one of the strongest arms in the league where he can throw the deep ball, he can move around the pocket and scramble a little bit if he needs to. So he gives you that little bit of added presence for your fantasy football stat sheet. And then we went over Devin Singletary earlier in this podcast. So that's another name to look out for in this offense. He is a scat back who also is very good at catching the ball out of the backfield, along with Zach Moss, the rookie that they drafted out of Utah State. Or University of Utah, I apologize. And so those are just two guys that I think can really help carry the load in their backfield. And then they also traded for Stephon Diggs from the Minnesota Vikings. So that right there, you get a top 5 receiver in the NFL, in my opinion, for Josh Allen to throw the ball to. Stephon Diggs is also an extremely good deep threat, which matches up well in that offense and Josh Allen's arm. So to have a big-time wide receiver in this offense is extremely good, especially with John Brown and Cole Beasley were extremely productive for them last season. So now you got a very solid wide receiver crew that can really challenge any defense in the NFL. So the first team that I'm high on, the Buffalo Bills. Now let's get to a different team, a team that didn't have the most successful season last year, and it might surprise some people that I'm high on this for fantasy football-wise. But we talked about one of their players earlier today, and I'm going to go with the Detroit Lions as one of the teams that I would look out for a couple different players on their offense for your fantasy football drafts. And the reason is this is a high-flying pass-first offense that when Matt Stafford was healthy last year, he was putting up MVP numbers. And honestly, they have one of the better receiving cores in the league with Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, and Danny Amendola. And those first two that I mentioned, Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones, I would expect to both be extremely dependable this coming season as Matthew Stafford looks to be back at full health. You also have a very dependable tight end in TJ Hawkinson, both in the run and pass game, and I think that's just going to be a nice security blanket for Matt Stafford. We also talked about DeAndre Swift, their second-round pick this season, that I think could really make a push for Rookie of the Year if everything goes as planned for these Detroit Lions. He's going to have Kerryon Johnson to split the carries with, but I could see DeAndre Swift coming in and really being that main guy in the run game, especially with a healthy fullback in Nick Bawden. I think that offense has the chance to really be firing on all cylinders throughout the season as long as Matt Stafford stays healthy. And I think if that happens, these Lions could be a very dangerous offensive team. Who knows how the defense will pan out, but the offense has the opportunity and has the chances to keep them in every single game that they play. And last but not least, for my third offense to draft players from for your fantasy football teams this season, kind of a no-brainer, but I'm going to go with the San Francisco 49ers. The team who lost to the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl are returning just about everyone on offense besides for Emmanuel Sanders. And I think this offense is just going to keep getting better and better. You saw Jimmy Garoppolo in his first year as a full-time starter after tearing his ACL just really take control of the offense and do well besides for a couple almost bonehead interceptions. But that's going to happen for a young developing quarterback. When Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator for the Falcons, it took Matt Ryan a season or two to really adjust to this offense. It's supposed to be one of the more complex offenses in the NFL. And then his second year had an MVP season, and I could really see that being the case for Jimmy Garoppolo once he gets this offense down. And he also just keeps getting more and more weapons. I mean, you obviously have the best tight end in the league with George Kittle, who's just a whole different freak. And then I think Deebo Samuel could be a top receiver in the NFL this year. I'm going to get into more about that later. And then Brandon Ayuk, which we talked about earlier, this offense is just filled with weapons and filled with potential to really just consistently put up points for your fantasy team this year. Raheem Mostert, running back that we talked about earlier, also showed what he can do with given the opportunity. But one thing, aside from the players that makes this offense so special and so different from the other teams, is Kyle Shanahan. The offense, he's just an offensive mastermind. And the way he puts his players in positions to succeed and really just opens up the field for all these guys is something that you don't see with a lot of offensive coordinators. You saw the way he used Deebo Samuel in the pass and the run game. I think that could be the same for Brandon Ayuk. This zone running scheme that he runs with Raheem Mostert is perfect for his style of running. And all around, it's just an offense that I see really expanding on their success. One more team that is also kind of an obvious one is the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, easy to say. It's just Lamar Jackson is pretty much, you're getting a quarterback and a running back with how dangerous he used. They use the read option a lot. And also you have a top tight end in Mark Andrews, who I'm high on. He is a red zone machine. They love to find him down there in the end zone. Then there's also Mark Ingram, who consistently throughout his career has always been one of the best fantasy football running backs to get. He pounds the run game as well as is very productive in the passing game for the Ravens. They also have Willie Snead in the pass game, who's a consistent producer, as well as Marquise Brown, or aka Hollywood Brown, who is someone who really is a threat anytime he's on the field to do something big, and that just helps out Lamar Jackson in the offense. And some might wonder, talked about the Ravens, talked about the Niners, two of the top teams in the NFL. Why not bring up the Chiefs? Because obviously they are the Super Bowl champs. And the reason I'm not as high on the Chiefs offense as a whole is because Patrick Mahomes really spreads the ball out to everyone. He throws it to anyone who's open. He doesn't really lock onto one receiver. So yes, Patrick Mahomes is a top 3 quarterback. He's someone you could draft in the first round, and Travis Kelce's also great. But the offense as a whole, I would not advise to draft just because it can be top heavy. So those are some of my top 4 offenses to keep an eye out. Obviously, yes, there's going to be producers all around the NFL, but the Detroit Lions, the Buffalo Bills, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Baltimore Ravens are some of the teams that I am high on as a whole, as the entire offense has the ability to have multiple people producing extremely well for your fantasy football team. So I would just keep an eye out on those teams and their players as you go about preparing for your fantasy football drafts. We talked about the good, we talked about the great teams that are going to be helping you guys out. Now let's talk about some teams that honestly I would shy away from, similar to what I did with the rookies. Who are some offenses that might have some hype going into them? And I'm not saying they're not going to be good, but it's different to be good on paper and good in the fantasy football stat sheet. So let's get into some of the teams that I would maybe avoid a little bit or a little into the season until you see how they're doing. And so with that being said, the first team I would shy away from, a little bit of a no-brainer here, the good old New England Patriots. With Tom Brady leaving, that offense is under a lot of question marks. Jarrett Stidham seems to be the guy they're going to be going with, the quarterback out of Auburn, second-year guy, who reports out of New England, they talk about him like they're extremely high, but it's just a very big question mark, You really don't know what it's going to be like until we actually see him on the field playing. The receiving core is kind of thin. I mean, Mohamed Sanu and N'Keal Harry are both solid receivers, but you don't know enough about N'Keal Harry to really judge him. And Mohamed Sanu, in my opinion, is no more than just a 2 or 3 guy. There's Julian Edelman as well, but Edelman just doesn't really do much, in my opinion, unless he has other help around him and he can kind of flourish with that help around him. So there's just a lot of question marks going into the 2020 season for the New England Patriots for really the first time in years. It's going to be interesting. I think that division is wide open, and I talked about the Bills as a team to draft earlier in the episode. I think they have a better chance of winning that division than the Patriots do. And another team that I would be a little careful on drafting players, this is a team that I'm always a little questionable on with drafting their offensive players, is the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously, Russell Wilson is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He gives you a threat with his legs. He throws the ball great, and he's going to be putting up points. But I don't see much production with their tight end, who they usually like to throw to. Greg Olson's getting older. He just signed there. They do have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and Metcalf's good, and Lockett's good as well. But the thing with the Seattle Seahawks is Russell Wilson doesn't really pick just one guy and throws it. He'll move around, he'll see who's open, and he finds whoever's there. And that's why it's hard to predict wide receivers really breaking out with that offense because Russell Wilson spreads the ball around so much. So it makes it a little difficult to predict when exactly the it's best to draft receivers from the Seattle Seahawks. And then there's running backs. And I talked about Rashad Penny when he comes back from the injury that he had earlier in this episode. And while I think he could be a great value pick, their offensive line is not that great, and it has struggled the past couple years. So it's something to pay attention to as you move forward with your fantasy football drafts, especially with the Seattle Seahawks playing in the NFC West with one of probably the top division in the NFL with the Rams, the 49ers, the Seahawks themselves, and an improving Cardinals team. You know, the Rams and the Niners both have some of the top defensive fronts in the league, so that's going to make it even harder when you're playing each team 2 times a year. So Seattle Seahawks are one that I would just be a little bit more careful about as you head into your fantasy football drafts. Next up for teams I would watch out for and kind of avoid as you head into your draft is going to be the Tennessee Titans. This is a Titans team that is a complete run-first offense, and Derrick Henry showed what he can do given the chance to be an absolute workhorse at the end of the season last year. And obviously, you can't really go wrong with him, but the thing is there's not much else around him. I don't trust A.J. Brown and Corey Davis at receivers to really put up good production. And with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback, it seems like that's their guy. It just kind of scares me in the passing game, to be honest. There's not much there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Titans continue to improve because their tight end, Jonnu Smith, is solid, but also nothing crazy. He's not going to be a top 10 tight end scorer. So aside from Derrick Henry, that offense really does not have that much firepower. So it's going to be a team to avoid aside from Derrick Henry. And both these last 2 teams that I have talked about, the Seattle Seahawks and the Tennessee Titans, they both were in the top 15 in scoring last year in the NFL. But I still would kind of hesitate in drafting some of their players high because I just do not see a big turnout in fantasy football production from some of these guys. And now for my final team to avoid in your 2020 fantasy football drafts is the Denver Broncos out of the AFC West. They have Drew Lock coming in for the first year as a full-time starter under new offensive coordinator Pat Shurmur, and I do think Drew Lock could be pretty good, but the running game with Melvin Gordon, I don't know how that's going to be. Melvin Gordon's kind of injury prone, and I just don't see this offense putting up huge numbers. Noah Fant at tight end also had some injury issues last year. They have Cortland Sutton and then a rookie, Jerry Jeudy, who could be good, but that's just a young receiving core and kind of unproven. Playing in a tough division with the up-and-coming Raiders as well as the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, it's going to be a tough road for the Denver Broncos, so I would just be a little careful on taking that team. So there you have it for my top teams to draft players from and my top teams to avoid. Coming up after the break, we're going to be going into the top of the top players who are the best 5 fantasy football performing players in every single division. So stick around. We will be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
thank you for making it this far. We just went over what offenses as a whole are worth drafting and are not worth drafting. And now we're going to end the show on a fun topic. We're going to be talking about what 5 players in every division are going to be performing consistently week in and week out to the best of their ability. These are going to be guys getting drafted in the top 5 rounds, the big names that everyone knows. And it's really just going to be going over which guys can you not miss with the opportunity in your draft. So let's get started. We're going to begin over in the AFC West to be exact. And number 5 for best players to watch out for in the AFC West, we got our first rookie, Henry Ruggs, the Alabama product, going in the first round to the Las Vegas Raiders, is someone to watch out for. I think he could immediately go in and be that number 1 guy in that offense and really take it to another level. They have a productive running game with their other Alabama product in Josh Jacobs, and a good receiving core already with Tyrell Williams and Darrell Waller at tight end. And so I'm thinking that Henry Ruggs could be a huge addition for that offense and really a toy that John Gruden is going to love to be using. Next up, I'm going to be going with Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. He's been the Chargers' number 1 guy for the past couple years now, and he really is someone who consistently shows up every week. Sometimes that offense can be a little tricky, and without Phillip Rivers for the first time in years, it's going to be difficult to judge. Are they going to go with Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert? But no matter what, no matter which quarterback they go with, they are going to have a nice security blanket with Keenan Allen being able to put up points consistently every single week. And now, number 3, we're going to get to the Super Bowl champs. One of the, if not the best tight end in the league. It could be up for debate, but I am going to go with Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. Travis Kelce is someone who is always a threat when he's on the field, not only because he's got one of the, if not the best quarterback, but he is a red zone machine. Over the past 3 years, he has found the end zone 23 times. That's not something you get out of most of your tight ends, and the tight end position is really of value in fantasy football. If you can get a tight end who they like to find in the end zone, it can really pay off for your team. So I would watch out for Travis Kelce. He's a guy who's not going to make it past the first or second round in too many drafts because he holds that value for that offense, being one of your leading scorers. Coming in at my number 2 spot for fantasy football production in the AFC West is Las Vegas Raider running back Josh Jacobs. Now, this is another Alabama product, and John Gruden loves to pound the rock when he gets the chance. They are a complete run-first offense, and this is a running back who was hurt the last end of the 2019 season and still rushed for over 1,000 yards, and honestly probably got robbed of the NFL Rookie of the Year choice by Kyler Murray. If Josh Jacobs didn't get injured, he was most likely going to bring that trophy home. So I would watch out for him on the fantasy football drafts. And last but not least, the most obvious pick of them all, one of the only quarterbacks that warrants a round 1 pick, is Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs. Doesn't even need to be explained. This guy is a freak. He makes throws that people have never seen before, and he is just going to continue getting better and better in Andy Reid's pass-first offense. He's a guy you really cannot go wrong with. He's going to put up points week in and week out. And now, as we make it over to the AFC South, this one a little bit more difficult to predict, as a lot of players went in and out of this division. And a new guy to this division, Phillip Rivers at number 5, the new Indianapolis Colts quarterback. This is an offense that we talked about earlier with the 2 rookies of Michael Pittman Jr. and Jonathan Taylor coming in. He's got one of the best offensive lines in the league, and I think has the opportunity to really flourish with a good team this year. Number 4, little riskier pick because of the team that he plays on. I'm going with Leonard Fournette, the Jacksonville Jaguars running back. He's a workhorse, but you just never know how much production you're going to get out of that offense. But when he goes off, he is a person who can change fantasy football matchups. Number 3, a guy I was high on earlier in this podcast that we just talked about, is Indianapolis Colts rookie running back Jonathan Taylor. And a big reason I'm putting him here is just because of that offensive line he's going to be running behind. You got Quentin Nelson, who is just probably the best guard in football. Alongside running behind that, he has an offense that's going to be open holes for him. And he's got a good quarterback that defenses aren't necessarily going to be able to stack the box in. So expect Jonathan Taylor to have a big year this year. Number 2, someone we talked about earlier in this podcast, is Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. I think goes without showing. He is just an absolute animal, and he gets it done every single week for that offense, especially being the number 1 guy. And the number 1 guy for the AFC South, Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson. Now, I have him as my top player in this division, but I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know if I would pick him up in the first couple rounds. Quarterback's a position you can get value in later on in the draft, so expect him to be probably one of the top 6 to 7 quarterbacks taken, but be careful about taking him too high. We're going to make it over to the AFC North now. Number 5 in the AFC North, kind of a controversial name, and a team that's hard to predict, but I think Baker Mayfield is going to make a huge jump this year. He's got a new head coach in Kevin Stefanski from the Minnesota Vikings, and I think this team is going to vastly improve under him. I think Baker Mayfield knows it's time for him to kind of put up and shut up. It's time for him to put his money where his mouth is and really show there was a reason that he was the number 1 overall pick. And also coming in at 4, the Baltimore Ravens running back Mark Ingram. We went over it earlier. He's just a guy who produces not only in the ground game, but also in the passing game out of the backfield. Someone you can depend on every single game. Number 3 in the AFC North is Juju Smith-Schuster. This is a guy who is going to benefit now having a healthy Big Ben. The Steelers' offense was hard to predict and hard to judge last year, but I expect Juju Smith-Schuster to get right back to where he was in the 2018 season when he was one of the top fantasy football receivers. Number 2 is Baker Mayfield's number 1 guy. I expect Odell Beckham Jr. to have a bounce-back season and actually finally get back to where he was with the New York Giants at one point. I think Beckham's going to have a big year this year. The obvious first top guy in the AFC North, though, is Lamar Jackson. Similar to Patrick Mahomes, the only 2 quarterbacks I would think are worthy of a round 1, maybe even top 2 draft pick. They are going to go very high, and rightfully so. All right, let's going to keep it moving. Going to the AFC East now. A guy that we've talked about multiple times in this podcast, Devin Singletary of the Buffalo Bills. I actually have 3 Buffalo Bills in this list. Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs are on the top of my list for this one. Again, it's just I'm high on the Buffalo Bills. I think they have a chance to win that division, and I think these could be top performers in the NFL because of the offense they run. It's going to benefit all 3 of them. The other 2 guys I chose to highlight out of the AFC East is Devontae Parker, Miami Dolphins wide receiver. It's a risky pick, but they need to throw it to someone, and I think Tua is going to have a nice number 1 guy in Devontae Parker. You saw him really start to pick it up at the end of the season, and I think he's going to start right where he left off. The other guy is, of course, Le'Veon Bell of the New York Jets. New York Jets are one of the only teams that I think in this division that didn't vastly improve, but Le'Veon Bell is one of the best running backs in the league nonetheless. So, again, I would expect him to have a big year and produce for you. So those were the AFC teams. A lot of big names, fun guys to talk about. We're going to head over to the NFC now. In the NFC South, starting off at number 5 is Tampa Bay Buccaneers' Mike Evans. He's already always a top performer, but now that he has Tom Brady, Gronk, he's got a lot of guys around him that is really only going to elevate his fantasy football value because he is not going to be the only key guy in that offense. Going down the list, we got Alvin Kamara from the New Orleans Saints. Another New Orleans Saints guy I have on this is Michael Thomas as well. Both these guys are going to continue to produce. When you have Drew Brees at quarterback, it's just your offense. It's going to be churning. It's going to be putting up points. So expect those two guys to be very dependable. The other last two, I have Julio Jones of the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, that goes without saying. He's been a top receiver in this league for the past 8 to 10 years. He's still got Matt Ryan at helm, so I would not expect Julio Jones' numbers to drop off too much. But the number one guy in this this division in the NFC South is the one and only Christian McCaffrey. He gives you value that a lot of running backs aren't able to give you. I mean, he's the most dynamic running back in the league, in my opinion. He is going to give you points out of the passing game, so you got a PPR machine right there, as well as putting up crazy numbers in the running game. So expect Christian McCaffrey to really step it up this year, especially without Cam Newton. They're going to need a guy to pick up the pace. And now, as we get to the NFC North, this was a tougher division for me, honestly, because it is just so loaded in offensive firepower. You got Adam Thielen coming in at 5 from the Minnesota Vikings, especially now that the Vikings do not have Stephon Diggs anymore. Adam Thielen is going to be put even more so into that number one role with Kirk Cousins throwing in the ball. So I would expect his numbers to either stay consistent, if not even jump up. Number 4 is Matthew Stafford of the Detroit Lions. It was tough for me not to put Kenny Golladay in this as well, but with such a loaded division, had to get Matthew Stafford in there because when he's healthy, he proved last year he can still play at a very high level before he got injured. And honestly, it's not like he's injury prone. He's usually pretty healthy. This is a guy who was putting up an MVP season despite not getting the wins from the Detroit Lions. Number 3, of course, is the one and only Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and he is someone who just spreads the ball around. We talked about the Packers offense kind of being a question. The next guy I was going to talk about is his number one guy is in Devontae Adams, so expect these two to have a big year together, as well as try to find some other weapons that were already in-house, like Allen Lazard. Number 1 in the NFC North, one of the most dynamic running backs is Dalvin Cook. He showed what he could do as a full-time starter last year and really took off with that offense. And like I said earlier, just now, a second ago, was that with Stephon Diggs out, Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook, more is going to be put on their shoulders, and I would expect them to really go off. As we make our way to the NFC East, this was another interesting one. Number 5, I want to talk about a guy who's going to get picked high, Amari Cooper of the Dallas Cowboys. He puts up big numbers year in and year out. He's a dependable number 1 receiver, so expect him to continue that trend. Then you got Carson Wentz of the Philadelphia Eagles. I know his targets are a little suspect. You don't really know who he's going to be throwing the ball to, but he does have Zach Ertz, so that takes away some pressure when you got a tight end like that. So keep him in mind as you go about your fantasy football drafts. Though I don't exactly think he is the best quarterback in that division. I have Dak Prescott rated just a little higher than him. A lot of it's got to do with, the fact that Dak consistently stays healthy. Carson Wentz is yet to play a full season in the NFL, which is worrisome. It is. So I'm putting Dak a little higher than that. He's got a lot of weapons around him this year in Amari Cooper, Zeke. It's just a good year for Dak Prescott. The next guy is also Ezekiel Elliott. I think he is going to continue his trend as a top running back in this league in what really is going to be an interesting offense with Mike McCarthy now calling the plays. But, of course, in the NFC East, the top guy, one of my favorite running backs in the NFL, Saquon Barkley.
This is a guy who can just do it all, and with an improving offensive line, he's going to get more holes, and he's going to be fed the football. So I would expect Saquon Barkley. He's someone who's not going to make it out of the top 3 or 4 picks in your draft. So if you get lucky, that is one that I just personally would not be able to pass up on. And now, as we make our way to the final division, a division is loaded in talent, the NFC West. There was a lot of good guys to put on this list, but I'm going to start it off number 5 with a bit of a surprise. I'm going Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. This is a guy who I think is really going to take off as Kyle Shanahan's number 1 guy. And not only Kyle Shanahan doesn't just use him in the passing game, he really spreads it around. He'll give him some sweeps. He'll use him as almost like a running back. And when he runs angry. So expect him to be a big part of what the 49ers are going to be doing on offense. He is a machine, and I think he is going to really jump up in his production numbers. Number 4, this was a hard one for me. I almost put Cooper Kupp in here of the Los Angeles Rams, but I decided to go with Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. This is a quarterback who, in Cliff Kingsbury's offense, I think has a really good opportunity to make that sophomore leap after his first season, especially now he always had Larry Fitzgerald. Now he gets DeAndre Hopkins too. It's going to be an offense that is filled with wide receivers. I mean, he's got Andy Isabella, Keyshawn Johnson too. This is just a team that his options are going to continue to rise, and I think Kyler Murray has the chance to really come on the scene and show what he's capable of. Number 3, the most dependable quarterback of them all, is Russell Wilson of the Seattle Seahawks. He's one of the only Seahawks players I would, feel comfortable drafting high. He just shows up week in and week out. He's been a top 5 quarterback the past 5 years, and he's someone who is just a very good quarterback. You can't go wrong with Russell Wilson. Number 2, new guy to the division, DeAndre Hopkins, Arizona Cardinals. It's going to be an extremely fun offense to watch. I just talked about Kyler Murray. Now we're going over. He's got now top 3 receiver in the league in Hopkins, and it's going to be fun to see this offense go because Cliff Kingsbury has a kind of a spread, college-like, air-it-out offense. And now that he's got the tools and the weapons to really use in that offense, it's going to be extremely fun to watch what he does. They play in a tough division, so that's not easy. I don't see them winning the division or making a big jump like that, but I think there's a big chance for some productivity in there. And number 1, one of the more fun players to watch in the NFL, George Kittle of the San Francisco 49ers. This is just, he's a beast. He plays with so much conviction. When he gets the ball, he honestly can take it the distance every single time because of how he plays. He's one of the more athletic tight ends in the league. I mean, he's broke records the past 2 years, and it's someone who is just an absolute freak. He played last season with ankle chips in his ankle. He had broken parts of his ankle and still played the whole season. So it's someone who's dependable. He's going to show up every single week, and it's going to be hard to take him off the field. So expect him to continue his rise as one of the best tight ends in this league. Guys, we made it this far. I just want to thank you for listening with me. I gave you the ins and outs of the fantasy football draft this coming season. I hope I gave you some names you hadn't heard of before, maybe some people that you're going to be able to get late rounds and really see some value in, as well as some of the bigger names that everyone already knows about to just keep an eye on and kind of plan for your fantasy football draft. Really appreciate you guys listening. Again, thank you for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you guys could, I'd like to ask that please remember to subscribe to the show and go ahead and please write a nice little review. That helps us out so much. That would be greatly appreciated. And also, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hey, thank you guys. I am your host, Grady Duggan of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, and we will see you later.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.